Massachusetts State Police, who's assigned to this office, and Deputy Superintendent Michael Medeiros of the Cambridge Police. We are here today to announce that a couple of hours ago, after 32 years, Edward Watson, who is 65 years old, was arrested in Mattapan for the murder of Michelle Miller. And Ms. Miller's picture is immediately to my left. Ms. Miller is a former United States Army soldier. She was 29 years old when she was last seen alive at the Prospect Buffet, a restaurant bar in Central Square in Cambridge, in July of 1992. And that middle photograph shows you on the upper left side the location of the buffet where she was last seen, and I'll talk about some of those other locations as well. After having been seen at the buffet that night, Ms. Miller was then discovered about 2 weeks later in an address on Washington Street, 245 Washington Street, which is approximately in the middle of that photograph. And you have on the far left, your right, a picture of what that address looked like at the time. It now looks very different. And her body was found in the basement of that building on Washington Street after a neighbor had complained about an odor that was coming from the basement. Evidence that was developed by our cold case homicide unit revealed that Ms. Miller was the victim of a murder for hire plot, and that Mr. Watson had killed her in that basement at the request of her abusive partner, who is the father of her children, a man named Daniel Innes. Mr. Innes was sentenced on his own to 15 to 20 years in state prison in 1994 for an unrelated manslaughter charge, and he died in 2012. Michelle Miller was the mother of two beautiful children who she adored. She had served in the military, but by 1992 she had fallen on some hard times. She was being abused by Mr. Innes, who was jealous and violent, and he was threatening to take the children away from her. On July 28, 1992, the day after she had told her social worker that she'd be seeking a restraining order against Mr. Innes, she disappeared. When she was discovered in the basement of 245 Washington, she was partially naked. Her face was covered by a blanket, and that building was truly filthy and not at all in the condition that it is in today. For more than 30 years, this case has gone unsolved. But our cold case unit, primarily using archived records from the Department of Social Services, was able to unearth details that were previously unknown about the abuse she had been suffering at the hands of Mr. Innes and how she had tried to protect herself immediately before she disappeared. Edward Watson was identified as an associate of Mr. Innes, and he is the person that we allege carried out that killing at the request of Mr. Innes. And he'll be arraigned this afternoon on a single count of murder in the Cambridge District Court. This case is yet another example of the purpose of developing a cold case unit, which is that we do not forget what happens to people when they lose their life in Middlesex County, and that we will take every possible step to hold accountable. And today begins that journey of holding Mr. Watson accountable for those charges. I was able to speak earlier today with Ms. Miller's son and daughter, who are obviously now adults, as well as her brother, and to tell them about both the fact that Mr. Watson had been arrested and charged with the murder of their mother, and that the evidence indicated that that murder took place at the behest of their biological father. It's really a reminder, particularly at this time of year, of the long-term impact of these kind of crimes and how they tear a family apart and the hole that they leave in those families. And obviously, having been given all of this news, the family has asked that their privacy be respected while they process everything they've learned today about what happened. I'm now going to turn the microphone over to the Cambridge Police Commissioner, Christine Elo, to speak a little bit about the work of the city.
Thank you, District Attorney Ryan. I'm extremely grateful for the partnership that the Cambridge Police Department has with the Mass State Police and the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. This arrest was the result of teamwork and diligence, and we really hope that this arrest brings some closure to the family. Thank you.
Obviously, given where we are fairly early in this investigation, I'll take a few questions.
Can you give an idea of what forensics you have, if any, because this sounds like a case where you don't have one of the co-conspirators around to verify the other co-conspirator. Can you address some of the evidence you have to tie this all in?
So we will address that at a later point, but suffice it to say that we are confident that we have sufficient evidence to have charged Mr. Watson with this homicide.
Is there any physical evidence, biological, deep?
Happy to talk about that in court.
DA Ryan, for clarification, had the murder for hire plot, had that been established around the initial investigation in 1992, or has that just come to light?
That has come to light now.
So the Innis, is that his
Mhm.
name? Was he ever a suspect, or is this now also new information?
This is really pretty new information.
So did his children and his
Brother-in-law.
brother-in-law not have any knowledge of this, and
No.
so they just thought he went to jail for something else?
They knew he had gone to jail for something else many years after
But
Michelle
never-
had disappeared.
But did they not know she was even being accused of the relationship, and so they knew nothing about it?
The children were very young, and obviously what they did learn was largely filtered through their biological father.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so, as you said, they want their privacy, so maybe you could give us an idea, their reaction to this, and was it completely new to them, or?
It was completely new.
So, I mean, how do they come to that when they hear their ne'er-do-well father and brother-in-law is now being said to this and the guy?
I think it's fair to say, as we described it to them, it was very bittersweet information. On the one hand, realizing that the police had never given up in the search for what happened to their mother, and that we were, as I said, able to begin today a journey of accountability for Mr. Watson, but then learning that the person who was their biological father is alleged to have been the person who set that in motion.
DA Ryan, can you speak to the types of archives you found from the Department of Social Services and what they detailed?
Well, they really meticulous records from the social worker detailing the contacts they had had with the family. As I mentioned, the information that Ms. Miller had shared with them the day before she disappeared, that as a result of the violence that she'd been enduring in the home, that she was going to seek a restraining order. So a lot of information that was really carefully preserved in those records.
And why didn't that come up then? I'm going to assume it's a lot harder to go back and find it now than a woman is freshly murdered. This stuff is in the records on her. Why didn't it get found then?
One purpose of the cold case unit is really to take a fresh look at things, to go back. You know, things were very different in 1992. Remember that Miss Miller was not found for a couple of weeks. They didn't have as much information as we often have when you're very fresh on an incident. And the cold case unit's purpose is really to start over from scratch and see and build out information about a victim, information about potential people of interest, and then put together what's happened. And that's really what they were successful in doing in this case.
The social worker takes a request for a restraining order, social worker, I'm not sure, and then not see the person, and 2 weeks later they come up murdered, not saying.
Well, it wasn't so clear that it had been a murder at that time. So it took a long time to, obviously when you find somebody after the passage of time, it was the middle of the summer, it takes some period of time. So it wasn't as simple as we found somebody who's clearly been murdered and what happens next.
What was her cause of death?
We'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon, but suffice it to say that there was not an immediate cause of death.
You talked about 1992 being a different time. I don't know if you can speak at all to a woman in 1992 being abused, the sort of cultural feeling of not being able to come forward and do anything about it versus 2024?
Well, I think not particular to this case. In general, for somebody with some small children, you know, you have to remember there's obviously the same issues about resources and where do you go and how am I going to support children and do I separate and try to live in two households? So there's that piece. There's also, you know, obviously people want to hope that things will get better, especially when you have more children. Sometimes there are promises things will be better, and then sadly those promises aren't fulfilled. So many things have changed. I'm not sure some of those pieces have changed as much.
Has law enforcement changed?
Yes, law enforcement has clearly changed in terms of their response. You know, we are fortunate in Massachusetts to have first aggressor laws. People are much better trained in recognizing things. It is no longer a situation of this is a family matter and we'll let people work things out.
And another person we can't get a reaction from likely is the suspect. Was his first contact with you folks on the arrest, or how surprised was he when this came out?
I can't speak to that, how surprised he was.
Well, people arrested him?
Yeah.
Can the people who arrest him say how he reacted to an arrest?
I think it is probably fair to say that he did not anticipate that so many years later people would still be working on this. Thank you. Thank you.
Is it Buffett? Buffett is the correct pronunciation?
Buffett is the correct pronunciation.
There's not a picture on the third.
That's the address where the body was found in that basement down there. It looks very, very different now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Do you know how to spell that?
Yeah.
I'm just sorry, Megan, I didn't want to like ask 800 clarifying questions. Edward Watson is his brother-in-law?
No,
No.
no,
What was-
just an associate of.
Okay, got it. So what was the brother-in-law thing?
It's the surviving people.
Okay, thank you. My brain went.
There's more pictures. Does everybody want them?
Are you sending this out digitally?
Yep, I'm gonna send
Suspect-
it out digitally. I
Suspect
sent
pictures are the only new things.
those images out.